What's up? I'm Jared Harris, and you're listening to episode 52 of Beats by Jer. Today, I am thrilled to be joined in conversation by the one and only Dallas Green of both Alexisonfire and City and Color. Today's episode is brought to you by The Spill Magazine and Dropout Entertainment. On November 7th, Alexisonfire returned with their newest studio release, Copies of Old Masters Volume 1, via Dynalone Records. The 4-song EP collects new covers of songs from Doughboys, Shallow North Dakota, Rusty, and The Tragically Hip, as Alexisonfire shines a spotlight on some of their central early 90s Canadian influences. The EP follows a string of live singles released across digital platforms, as well as the digital debut of 2012's Death Letter EP, making Copies of Old Masters Volume 1 their first new studio release since 2022's Otherness. Here is my conversation with Dallas Green. Dallas Green, thank you so much for joining me today for The Spill Magazine and Beats by Jer. And of course, congrats on the release of Copies of Old Masters Volume 1.
Thanks, man. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, of course. Anytime. I think the first question that everyone is asking, and it has to be asked, is what inspired the decision for Alexisonfire to make an EP entirely of covers?
Well, it's honestly the name of it. We've been kicking around for a very long time, like all the way back to kind of when we were kids writing, like Old Crows and Young Cardinals. I remember sort of saying something about the idea of like we should make a covers EP and call it Copies of Old Masters. I think like I read that somewhere, or just I don't know, one of those things, right? And I think with us. And being in a band, there's a lot of ideas like that get kicked around, and a lot of them just stop there.
Yeah.
But with this, I think because we had toured so much following the release of Otherness, and I had been touring as well with City and Color, and we'd kind of like been on the road a lot, and I think we were all feeling the urge to be creative together again, but we weren't necessarily ready to just like go and start trying to make new music. And, really the idea to kind of focus on just the Canadian rock tunes from the 90s stemmed from us a few summers ago. We just started adding Fully Completely by the Tragically Hip into our set. And we were just really jazzed on playing that song live. And it kind of sort of like, we're like, hey, you know what, we should record this version because it's cool and fun. And then it just kind of, snowballed into let's book some time in the studio and like record a bunch of Canadian rock songs. And we started, sending different lists of tunes around to each other. And then that was sort of what we settled on for the first 4. And that's kind of what we called it Volume 1, just to maybe like keep it open-ended to doing more of them, because it was just a lot of fun. And again, it was a way for us to get into the studio, be creative, but not really necessarily think about trying to make another record right away.
Yeah, that's really cool. I am curious, what specifically drew you then to that sort of early 90s Canadian genre?
Well, I think there's a multitude of things that sort of just allowed us to focus on that. But obviously it started with the hip cover that we had already been doing, and like wanting to record a version of that. And then there are so many bands from that era that were so important to me, especially me, because I'm a little older than the other guys, but to us, because growing up in Canada in the early 90s, like, you didn't have access to a lot. But what we did have was much music, and much music played. There was a Canadian content rule, right, where in order for much music to get funding, they had to play a certain amount of Canadian music. So there became this system where, the Canadian government and Much Music would create these grants and help bands make music videos. So you ended up seeing a lot of, and finding out about a lot of Canadian bands just because they were being played on Much Music, I sort of like that kind of that happened to us as well, right, in the early 2000s. But so there was all these bands that we either remembered fondly or thought like, oh, it would be cool to try to like pay homage to these bands that we grew up listening to. So you have bands like the Doughboys or Shallow, North Dakota, who I think are two sort of very influential punk bands from this country that may or may not have gotten the respect and audience that they should have back then. So it's kind of just like a love letter to this type of music and this genre of music that we all grew up with, and sort of helped pave the way for a bunch of kids in a small town in Canada to start a band.
Yeah, of course. I think it's super cool that, I mean, aside from the Tragically Hip, obviously, uh, all of these bands here are really underground, right? And like the influence is undeniable, but like to say that how many people have heard of these bands, it's really cool that you are shining a light to that era, to these bands that were so important to you guys. Um, I'm assuming then the title Old Masters is kind of a reference to the idea of these are just like long-standing influences that have, like lit that creative fire behind you guys back in the day.
Yeah, absolutely. Like when you think about the lineage of rock music and just like recorded music in general, it's like as much as everybody likes to try to, well, maybe not everybody, but you try to create your own thing. You try to, um, sort of like make your mark with your own style. But we're all sort of, especially kids that are of our age, we're all children of reference. There was
Of
so much already
course.
there for us to listen to when we were younger. Like, if it wasn't for me being a kid when grunge happened, I don't know what type of music I would have made, but I know that like because Alice in Chains is my favorite band, I
Mm,
know that's like yeah, I can hear it in everything I write. Is Jerry and Lane taught me how to sing harmonies, and we play our guitars half step down from standard tuning because Alice in Chains did, and that is like it's kind of like this inspirational relay race, right? Where the bands before you just hand the baton back to you, and you kind of keep running the race. And so I think that's sort of where the title comes from is yeah, again, just a love letter to the things that sort of paved the way for us to even be in a band in the first place.
yeah, that's really cool. I am curious then if the old masters are bands like you said, Doughboys, Shallow North Dakota, The Hip, Rusty. Um, how much do you actively seek these bands as a reference point now? Like Alexis on Fire has gone through so much evolution since the early records, right? And you guys are constantly evolving. Do you still find inspiration from these same touch points?
I mean, I think it's impossible not to, like when we recorded the Shallow North Dakota song, it was so fun to learn it because when we were trying to figure out our version of it, it was just sort of like we were making an Alexis song.
Mm,
It was so like all of the weird time signature changes and the kind of like part after part after part, like it reminded us of what we were trying to do when we were younger making the first record, you know?
yeah. The
So
arrangements on this EP are really, really inventive, really unique, really cool.
yeah, what was really good about this group of four songs too is I think it also allowed us to showcase everything we do. Where, you have the Shallow song, which just is like a full ripper for George just to do. You have Rusty, which Wade sings it amazingly, I think, and then the Doughboy song kind of allows me to sing lead, and then the Hip song we're all singing together. So you kind of get all of the different sort of versions of us in this EP, but doing other people's music.
Hmm. Hmm. Um, Tell me about the recording of these songs. I know it started with Fully Completely, but like how did the recording behind this EP go for you guys?
It was real quick and easy. Like we all kind of like once we settled on the tunes, and not clearly we had the Hip song already in our back pocket because we'd been playing it live. So we just booked some time, like I think it was maybe even just a weekend in this studio here in Toronto, and uh, we had all kind of sort of agreed on the arrangement. We all learned our parts. I think we maybe did one day before, like where we jammed and kind of got all of our arrangements together, so we knew what we were doing, and then we just went in simply and quickly recorded, and started with the Hip song because again we knew it so well that
Hmm.
that was just like a great way to start and kind of get the juices flowing. and then yeah, we just spent the next 2 days kind of going over it. And then we had our friend who's Darren, who engineered the last record we did, who happens to be Steele's cousin. He mixed it, and here we are. It was a really, like, again, it was a really easy process for us, and I think that's kind of what we were looking for, to go back in the studio, be creative, but just like, again, not have the pressure of like, let's go try to make another record right away, or like, let's go try to follow up otherness, because we did record these songs a long time ago. It's like last year sometime, so we've kind of just been sitting on it,
Hmm.
trying to figure out what to do, like just give it to people. So yeah, it was a real seamless, easy process. And again, just I think we've now since then we've written and downloaded a whhole batch of new Alexisons that we're going to go record soon.
Before, like, I definitely want to talk about that a little bit, but before we take the attention fully away from uh, Old Masters, I know that the Tragically Hip song was the first one that you guys started with, but was there any hesitation? Like, the hip Gord Downie is Canadian royalty. Was there at any point any sort of hesitation or like challenges that you may have had to overcome in like delivering this cover?
No, not whatsoever. I mean, there was no hesitation whatsoever about doing the hip song because, first of all, I Gord was my friend, and we collaborated together, and I feel like I have a good relationship with the hip guys as well. And I think since Gord has passed away, I've been singing a lot of hip songs in my set a lot of the times, just because you realize that, he's not here to sing them anymore, and somebody's got to do it,
Mm,
right? And
yeah.
so I saw this really great clip of the hip playing this kind of smaller, kind of like a club. It seemed like a club show in the early '90s, and they were doing this song fully completely, and they were just ripping so hard in this clip, and it was like the crowd was going insane, and it was like, I don't know. In that moment, I was like, oh, we can play this song, and I sent it to the guys and was like, let's do this song. And as soon as we started trying it, I was like, yeah, this sounds, this is our version of this incredible tune. And then the thing is, when you do a cover, you can either completely tear it down and make it your own, or like I said, you can just pay homage to it. And I think this is such a cool song already. And the thing about the hip was, they're not, you know, as sort of popular as they became, their song structures sometimes are pretty interesting. You
Mm-hmm.
know,
For sure.
it's not like they were a pop band. So
No,
they were just a fucking great rock band, and I
absolutely.
think I think that's what Alexis on Fire is. So it was it was sort of easy in a way, and I'm not trying to be like egotistical. I was just like, there was no way I was going to let us do a bad version of it, if that makes
Of
sense.
course, of
You know?
course. It's so to hear you speak about the hip and Gord is so um it's great to hear. I actually spoke to Hugh Dillon earlier this year regarding the new Headstones album, and it came up how you got them hooked up with Dine Alone. And, Hugh spent like a solid 5 minutes just talking about how much of Gord he saw in you through your collaboration. And I mean, that's like, as an outsider, that's a crazy thing to hear, right?
Yeah, that's a very beautiful thing to hear that
Yeah, he
you
couldn't
said.
he couldn't say enough kind things about like you as a person as well as the musicality. And he was like, it was just like working with Gord again.
Wow. Well, I mean, that's an honor to hear that, and I had a really beautiful time in the studio with those guys. And, you kind of realize this thing, right? Like, I'm going to name drop here for a second, but
Sure.
I got to tour with Alice in Chains in 2019. And
I
again, this
saw
is my
that.
favorite,
Yeah.
this is my favorite band, and Jerry Canfield is sort of the reason I play guitar. And they were just so lovely to me. And at the end of the tour, I was, thanking them for the 2000th time. And Jerry just looked at me at one point to kind of stop me from talking, and just said, "We're all in the same band, man." And that's what you realize, like I walked into that room with the headphones just because my friend was engineering the record, and I was like, oh, I know this band. I'm in this band, you
Mm,
know? And you kind of, there's just like an unspoken kinship. If you've done it for long enough, you know what it's like, right? That's kind of
yeah.
how
Yeah.
I can speak about it. And, when Gord came, when I met Gord and then he ended up coming and singing on a City and Color song, like the way he approached my music and the way that he respected what I was doing was such a benchmark moment for me in not only my career, but in my life and how I looked and wanted to look at the future of how I was going to approach this whole thing, you know?
Of
So
course.
to kind of hear Hugh say that, or hear that Hugh said that, it makes me feel proud, and it also makes me feel like I'm honoring what what Gord sort of laid out for me in the first place.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Um, Before we wrap things up, I know you mentioned earlier that Alexisonfire is working on the follow-up to Otherness. It has been a few years since you guys have released a studio record. Um, what can you say about that? Like, where is the band at in this process?
We are like, well, first of all, we kind of like I said earlier, when we were making this EP, it was to just sort of get ourselves back into the studio, but not just
Hmm.
immediately start trying to write tunes. We weren't interested in just like, oh, we made a record, so we got to make another one. It wasn't that. We were sort of we've never been in a better place uh, as a group of friends and the band, and so we're very cautious of of that,
Okay.
you know. And so, and I've kind of learned enough about myself that forcing creativity does not work very well for me. I just have to like let it come, and then when it comes, it's hard for me to turn it off. And so,
Mm,
I had spent we had spent a lot of time touring, and I was touring at the same time with my other band, and so there just wasn't a lot of room for creativity in my brain. But around December of last year, we kind of booked some studio time because there were some ideas floating around, and for the first time ever making demos, we just started booking a studio to set up and write and record as we were going, because we kind of did that halfway through the process last time, and it was very beneficial for us.
okay.
And especially because we don't live, around the corner from each other like we used to, where we would go and just spend all day rehearsing and writing.
Mm, mm-hmm.
We're sort of trying to use our time wisely. So we'd book 3 days in a studio, and we'd go in and we'd work on new ideas. And so we basically did that from about December, once a month or once every couple months, up until a few weeks ago. And we've ended up with a whole bunch of songs that we feel very, very strongly about. And now we're just going to actually go and book a studio soon and like sit and basically re-record everything, but like, you know,
Of course,
put
yeah.
together,
Bring these
you
demos
know,
to
put,
life.
yeah, like we've already, we've got enough songs for a record, but we've just sort of written more songs than maybe we ever have before we've gone into the studio. And that's just a testament to how excited I think the process has been. And I can't stop writing ideas for us. Like I was just working on one before you called I started yesterday, and the day before that, I had another one that I sent the guys. So um, we're very excited. I think we feel really strongly about the collection of songs, and now we're just excited to go in and bring it to life.
Fantastic. And on the note of you just having this sort of whenever the creativity strikes, my wife would be very upset if I did not ask you if there was a follow up to one of her favorite albums of all time, Rose Avenue, with you and me. Um,
Yeah, well, yes. We finished that. We've been working on that for a long time too. Just every couple of years we get together, and I mean we see each other a lot, but we don't. You know, we've both been pretty busy.
yeah,
you know,
of course.
but
But that's really cool to hear
yeah,
too.
yeah. We finished up a record like last April, Now,
Mm.
I don't know if that's going to come out or not, or if we're going to make more songs. But right now, we have a record, and again, who knows? That's a whole nother.
That's a whole nother conversation. I know.
And there's a lot that's not in my control in that situation, and so I'm happy for the friendship I have with Alicia, and there's a whole bunch of songs that are sitting there recorded that we like,
Mm.
and hopefully one day people hear it.
Yeah, that would be amazing. The final question that I like to leave people with, what are your three desert island records?
Uh, Sade Love Deluxe, Alice in Chains Dirt,
Mm.
and D'Angelo Voodoo.
Oh, oh, love that. All
Yeah,
three fantastic, but Dirt and Voodoo, that's an eclectic pairing, and I'm so down with that.
yeah, big time.
Yeah, yeah. Well, Dallas, thank you very much for joining me today for the Spill Magazine and for Beats by Jared. This was a fantastic call.
Thanks, man. Thanks for talking. I appreciate it.
Yeah, have a good one.
Yeah, you too.
Thank you for joining me in my conversation with Dallas Green. Copies of Old Masters Volume 1 is available across all streaming services with physical options, including colored vinyl, CDs, and cassettes, available via their web store. Tune in next week to hear my conversation with Finger 11 vocalist Scott Anderson as we discuss their first album in 11 years, Last Night on Earth. I'm Jared Harris, and this is Beats by Jer.